Hey everybody. So last class I wasn't really happy with the demo I put together. I don't know, I wasn't really on top of my game. So I decided to do 2 or 3 shorter videos to go over some of the different aspects I was trying to talk about in class. So this video I'll talk to you all about um, creating the textures in Illustrator and also the general methods of creating textures in Photoshop, or at least adapting photographic images to fit with your design. And I'll talk a little bit about text and probably touch on the eyedropper tool. So a lot of things to go over. In another video, I did already talk about using the grain textures and creating halftones, but since there wasn't sound on that, I'm going to talk about that again, so I'll just start with that. So I've got this version that's kind of been fully fleshed out, and this version over here that has just gotten started. So you can see over here on the donut that there's a slight gradient and texture on there. That's used. That uses something called the grain effect, and it's one of the few textures you can create in Illustrator, and they actually look half decent. I'm going to start off by clicking on this oval here. I'm going to copy it and paste in front, and I'm going to take the stroke off of it. Um, you'll see why in a little bit. And then I'm going to pull up my gradient menu and my swatches so I can easily pull the swatches over. I'm going to want to have a radial gradient, and I want it to go from the yellow to white, so that's fine. And I'm going to adjust it a little bit so the contrast is a little bit more apparent there. Okay, and then I'm going to go, let me pull this away. Then I'm going to go up to the effect drop-down menu. The grain feature is under Photoshop Effects, and it's under Texture, and it'll give you this preview. All of the Photoshop effects will give you previews, and you can tell by most of the previews that a lot of these effects are pretty terrible. So that's why I say the grain texture is one of the few features that you can actually manipulate and have look pretty good. The key is going to be using transparencies to make the changes look more subtle. So this is the grain that I have on the finished donut. I'm going to change it a little bit and see, maybe do a different kind of dot, maybe something a little bit bigger. But you can just kind of go through and try out different ones and see what they look like. I'll try this sprinkles one. And I'll increase the intensity this time, so hopefully you'll be able to see the dots a little bit more. So that's what I want, so I'll just click OK. And when that happens, you can see how that texture got converted to these little dots. But I actually want the yellow underneath to show through so it looks more subtle. So that's where the transparency comes into play. I'm going to go to the transparency menu, change this to multiply. Multiply is the one I use the most, but you can try out all these different ones. There's something slightly different that happens with each one, so it's just a matter of playing around with it. And then, let's see, I think that looks pretty good. So that's done. Pretty easy. The next thing that I played around with was putting some dark areas into the icing, I guess, on the donut, just to make it look a bit more dimensional. I did that using the gradient mesh tool, and I've talked about that before. Usually you'll use it with shapes. Well, you can do this with any kind of shape, but it just takes some trial and error. If you have a shape that's irregular, the grid is going to kind of try to fit with the overall shape, so you might get some weird lines in an overall grid that seems kind of strange. So you can always adjust the grid, but just be aware that it's not going to make a perfect grid. So I'm at the gradient mesh tool, and I'm just going to start clicking on the outer edges of this shape, and it'll just start to put in these lines. Actually, let me step backwards, because like with the previous one, you don't have to do this, but I like to copy and paste in front and kind of use a duplicate when I'm doing different features like this. I don't really need to do it, but at least not in this case, but I just feel like if I mess up, then I always have the original one to go back to. Choose the right color. Okay, I don't know why it's going to white like that. So I'm just clicking along and adding some of these lines. Depending on where you're clicking, the lines will either be horizontal or vertical. So I think that's an okay general grid. Now what I can do is start going to individual points and begin to color them. What I'm actually going to do is go into isolation mode by double clicking on the shape, so I can work with this without having to worry about messing with any of the other objects. And I am, I'm going to take the lasso tool and go around and just select some of these shapes on the outer edge, so I can add this dark purple to it and just make it look more three-dimensional. So this is just a purple color based off of the main purple that has a bit of black in it. So the lasso tool is a good thing to remember, because you can pretty quickly select just the certain points or objects that you want and make adjustments to them fairly quickly. sometimes I'll kind of forget about it and end up using the white arrow tool or direct selection tool, and it takes a lot longer than it has to. So the more you work in the program, the more you'll realize that there's ways to do things a lot more easily than you've done them before. It's just, you know, once again, trial and error and realizing the different features of the program. So I'm making some of these areas a little bit lighter. Then I'll go back to the main layer, and I think what I'm going to do now, and this is actually useful for having the regular shape behind it, I'm actually going to decrease the opacity so that some of those features are a little more subtle. So pretty basic as well. I also did the same thing to the coffee spilling out of the coffee cup over here. So I'll go ahead and do that to this shape. Let me make sure I have, see, I also have a darker brown, so I'm going to use that for the shading. Once again, I'm going to copy and then do Command F to paste in front just so I have this shape isolated. I'm going to double click to get to isolation mode, and I'm going to use the mesh tool to start adding points. Now, because this shape is so weird, these lines are going to look crazy. So you can see that some of them actually go beyond the borders of the shape itself. So I would say that's one of the drawbacks, is you just don't really know what's going to happen. All right, once again, I'm going to go and get my lasso tool and select specific points that I want to be darker. And take my darker brown and put that in there. Do it for the side here. And then some of these kind of valleys, I guess you'd call them. What happens, because the shape is so weird, the gradient is changing according to where the point is. So if I select a point, that color that I put there is only at that point. So it's trying to create a transition between that color and then the color within the next point. So because this is a very amoebic kind of shape, you get these more harsh areas of gradient transitions. So sometimes that can be remedied by moving the points around. It might also help to choose points near that point and putting that whatever the color is into that area so that maybe the change is more subtle. So maybe that one. And you can try also changing the angles. Each one of these points has 4 handlebars. So you can move those around. But in all honesty, they're kind of tough to deal with sometimes. There are designers and illustrators who do a lot of work with the gradient mesh tool. I'm sure you can find examples of their work online, and they do some amazing stuff where the illustrations look like photos. So there are definitely ways to work with the gradient mesh tool and have something look really great. It just takes practice, and you can't really be in a hurry when you're working this way. All right, not exactly the way I want it, but it's not too bad. So I'm going to leave that, and you'll notice that the stroke behind, on the shape behind this, isn't aligned the way I want it to be. So what I'm going to do in that case is select both shapes, hold down Shift to deselect the one on top, and then do, actually I'm going to do Command X to cut, and then Command F to paste in front, and then I'm going to take the fill off of it. So now it's just a shape with the stroke and nothing else. Then I want it to be behind that arc on the front of the cup. So I'm going to do Command X, select that stroke, and then do Command B to paste it behind there. So now it actually looks like it's coming out of the cup. I also wanted to put some gradients into these little droplets. I'm not going to do the gradient mesh tool. If we go, let's see, if we go back over to this one, you can see that these have a gradient in them. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. And I'm just going to start off choosing one of these droplets, and I'm going to go to the gradient, and I want to take the two browns that I'm working with and put a radial gradient on it. So I'll start off with the brown, the dark brown, and then the light brown. And I want the outer part of it to be dark, so I'm just adjusting it so you can actually see the difference. And that's pretty much all I want for that. Now to quickly transfer that effect to these other droplets, what I'm going to do is select all of those, and I can use the lasso tool to just circle around them. And then I'm going to use the eyedropper tool. So I'm going to select that and roll over this droplet because that has the gradient that I want. And I just click, and now those shapes have that effect in there. So like I mentioned in class, the eyedropper tool is just a really nice way to take something that is already existing in your document and apply it to something else. So that's pretty much done. Over here, you'll notice that I have these highlights, and those are actually created with a brush. I believe I mentioned before when we were talking about using brushes that you can make your own brush. So this is a shape I came up with. I actually made the shape by taking the ellipse tool, doing a really thin oval. And then taking the anchor point tool and clicking on the point to the left and the point to the right, it just takes the curves off of it. And then I just made it a bit smaller. And to make the brush, all I had to do was click and drag the whole shape over to the brushes menu. And when this comes up, you want to choose Art Brush. And you can choose different features, like if you want the width to stay fixed, if you want things to change according to the pressure that you put on the stylus, if you're using a tablet, and so on and so forth. If you want to use color with it, you need to adjust the colorization down here. Most definitely you'd want to use tints. These other ones have just additional ways of adjusting the color. If you go to tips, it'll kind of explain how the color works. But tints will take whatever current stroke color you have and apply that color in tints. Tints and shades, it'll use the color with added white and the color with added black. And then hue shift will take a color on either side of the color wheel, or on either side of the color on the color wheel. So just more stuff you can try out. So I'm just going to go with tints. And so what I can do now is select the brush and take a stroke color and I'll put it at 50%. And then just start drawing these highlights. So essentially what this is doing is it's taking the shape I have and adjusting it to how I put down the line. This one is actually a bit thicker than I want, so I'm gonna use the brush I used with the other one. It's this thinner one. Not quite as pretty as the other one I did, but I think you guys get the idea. The great thing about using the brush tool is that it works with points and just a general path, so you can always go back and actually edit individual points. So I could take the pen tool and actually delete a point and play with the handlebars to get the curve that I want. Okay, so that one is better. Move this one around. Really, I'm just trying to adjust these so that the curves look smooth. And I can also move these and I can scale them. Okay, so that's that. I could mess with that for another few minutes, but I'm not going to. So got something similar to what I have on the left. Then I want to show you all the halftone feature. Once again, I'm going to take this shape, select it, copy it, and paste in front. And I'm going to put a gradient in it, but this time I'm just going to work in black and white. I'm going to do a linear gradient. You can put gradients on the stroke, but obviously I don't want to do that. So I'll switch that and take the stroke off of it. And I'm actually going to use the gradient tool to adjust the angle here. So remember that the gradient tool you can use to help put colors in very specific areas and adjust the angle that it's at. So I'm going to go from black on one side to white in the middle, and then back to black on the right side. Actually, I think on this one I actually just went from light to dark, so I'll get rid of that one. Okay. So that's the way I want it now, and now that I've got the gradient there, I'm going to go to Effect and Pixelate and Color Halftone. The only thing I'm going to mess with right here is the maximum radius, and this determines the size of the dots. So you'll just have to play around with this. I believe the smaller the number, the smaller the dots. So for example, I'll just leave it at 8 right now and see what size I get. So those dots are pretty small. I'm going to go back up to Effect, and when you do effects, whatever the last effect you used was, it'll show up here right at the top so you can get to it really quickly. If you do Apply, then it takes the exact same specifications you had previously and applies it to whatever the current selection is, but I obviously don't want to do the exact same thing, so I'm just going to go to Color Halftone here at the top, and I'm going to change the radius to 20. Now, just so you know, these channels, these have to do with using halftones if you actually were using colors in your selected shape. So each channel, I believe, represents a color from CMYK, and the dots will come together to make up the color in the shape based on how the dots overlap and so on. So at 20, I get the larger dots like I have in the other example. So that's the way I want it. It looks pretty nice. But I want to actually change the color of the dots. So with that still selected, I'm going to go to Object and Image Trace. Actually, let me expand Appearance first. Okay. Expand Appearance, and then I'm going to go to Image Trace. And I'm actually going to change some of these. So you can bring up the Image Trace panel. You can go up here to the toolbar. You can also go to Window and Image Trace to bring it up. And the first thing I want to do is do Ignore White. So that way I only get the black. Otherwise, the mode is in black and white, which is what I want. and it looks pretty good. So I'm going to leave that. And then in order to actually get to the shapes here, I'm going to go to expand, and then it expands the shape. So now I can actually click on this object and put a color into it. In this case, I'm going to take the pink and do multiply so it gets the darker dots. And just like I did with the coffee up here, I'm going to select the shape behind it, copy it, select the halftone, paste in front, and take the fill out so that stroke shows up. So now that part is done. One last thing with these two happy characters is on the coffee cup, it's got a very slight texture to it. And this is actually a texture that's completely vector based. It's not done in Photoshop at all. I put a link to this on D2L, but there's actually some textures that you can use and add to your palette, basically making it into a symbol and utilizing it. So I'm trying to find that file. I can't find it right now. When you have the file, it shows up as just a regular vector object. And just like I did with these shapes, I can click and drag them to make a symbol. So over here under symbols, I had this new symbol shape that's just a texture made out of all these little dots. Essentially what the artist did was scan something in, upped the contrast, and live traced it. So it's just a square with all of these little dots in it of various sizes. So I just clicked and dragged this over to swatches, or sorry, symbols, made it a graphic, named it something, and it gets added over there. So for the coffee cup here, I can take the symbol and just click and drag it and size it down. I just want to put the brown color in there. So to do that, I'm going to expand it and then apply the color. The dots are so small that you can barely see, but it actually does have the brown in there. And then I'm going to use a mask to put this texture into the cup. So I'm going to put the texture on top where I want it to go, and then I'm going to take the cup. Actually, before I do that, with the other one, I duplicated the texture and overlapped it. So there's actually two of these. I'm going to make sure I'm working in the right layer. See, so I'm going to take that cup shape, copy it, do Command F to paste in front, and then I'm going to hold down Shift and select the two textures and then just right click and go to make clipping mask. And it'll take those textures and just put them right inside. And I'm going to do Command X again just to put that shape right on top of the original cup shape there. So Command F to paste in front of that. And then if I want it to be more subtle, I can adjust the opacity. So that's that with those guys. I'm going to go ahead and end this video here, and with the next one talk about using textures in Photoshop, and I'll also talk about making these letters and adding some effects to them. Thanks.